Today on Goji Center, we will discuss a very difficult topic for some Godzilla fans to digest. Will the G-Man ever die in the Monsterverse? And if he does, in what way should the King of the Monsters make his exit? We will be looking at clues from the past and present and try to formulate the best possible way for Monsterverse Godzilla to appropriately make his farewell. One of the things popping in many people's minds right now is, why even bring up this topic? Simple. Not too long ago, the latest outing in the Monsterverse was announced, not only giving us several hints, possibly revealing several plot points and giving us a general idea of what sort of elements will be present in this new movie, but also a very interesting word that made us at Goji Center HQ raise an eyebrow: supernova. Now, we did cover this concept a tiny bit in a previous breakdown, but today we will be dissecting this a little bit more and, of course, entertain the road of speculation until more official info is released. Now, Godzilla dying isn't something new. In fact, it's happened several times already, and recently. Let's quickly look at how Godzilla died in the past, and maybe we can pick up on a pattern that can potentially predict any possible circumstance in which Monsterverse Godzilla could also die. Godzilla's debut on the silver screen was also accompanied by a side of tragedy, at least for those that sympathized with the big atomic lizard. It was the year 1954, and one of the very first widely popular depictions of a big monster on screen. Here, Godzilla was depicted as a monster affected by nuclear testing that emerges from the sea and attacks Tokyo. At the end of the film, Godzilla is then killed by combined military and scientific efforts, thanks to Dr. Serizawa sacrificing himself, and with himself the knowledge of the next superweapon, in an effort to kill Gojira and spare the nation from further onslaught. Another infamous confirmed instance of Godzilla dying was the incident in Godzilla vs. Destoroyah in 1995, cause of death being a nuclear meltdown due to Godzilla's anatomy not being suitable to contain this much nuclear energy, causing it to literally melt and die. Alright, we are aware of the mixed sentiments regarding this big lizard, but it does follow the pattern of a Godzilla attacking a populated location. Zilla in 1998 was shown attacking New York and killed by humans by missile barrages while restrained by suspension cables. Moving on to the more modern era, year 2017, Godzilla Felis from the anime trilogy Planet of the Monsters is another instance of a confirmed dead Godzilla, even though Godzilla Earth, the big guy, is still alive. However, you may have noticed that we skipped over a few. That's because nobody at the time could say for sure that Godzilla was dead. For instance, let's go back to 1984, where Godzilla ends up trapped inside a volcano. While many believed that this was an implication of Gojira's death for a while, this was then proven false 5 years later in Godzilla vs. Biollante. Jumping to the year 2001 in GMK, and we see a special case where Godzilla appears to be dead, but then it's revealed that his heart is still beating. A similar case to this, and perhaps one of the most debated instances of whether Godzilla died or not, was that of Shin Godzilla, where he was technically frozen using internal coagulants that paused his internal fission. Depending on your definition of what is considered death or not, one thing is for sure: this thing is, for now, out of commission. The most recent instance of a Godzilla death was that scene in -1, where after several attempts of using the pressure of the ocean against the lizard failed, it seems like the classic brain go boom method once again came in clutch. However, although this particular Godzilla is technically dead, its remains are implied to bring forth a successor in a later sequel. These were just some of the many instances of Godzilla seemingly dying, making an exit, or just being temporarily out of commission. What can we learn from these instances? Well, there seems to be some patterns that we're picking up. Out of the several unaliving instances discussed already, note that in all the movies where Godzilla is portrayed as an animal that is attacking humans, this is where Godzilla gets killed by human efforts. In 1954, Godzilla was killed by the man-made oxygen destroyer. Zilla, although being portrayed as a force of nature and not necessarily out to kill humanity, dies all the same by human-crafted weapons. Godzilla Felis, a Godzilla specimen notably hostile to humans, attacking them on sight rather than waiting for them to engage, also was killed by a combination of his own actions and the triggering of EMP probes. Shin Godzilla, who was depicted to plow through densely populated areas, put out of commission by coagulants. Godzilla -1, a Godzilla who evidently held a grudge against humanity and took it out on the inhabitants of Ginza, murdering many thousands, killed by human-made weaponry. And finally, another additional example, Godzilla Ultima from Singular Point, who was decommissioned after turning into a pile of crystal after being portrayed to attack human establishments many times. So, seems like at least in most cases of a Godzilla reincarnation who constantly messes with humanity tends to be stopped or killed by humanity. An in-between point or case would be that of Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2, where humanity seems to be the troublemaker in capturing and using the infant Godzilla as bait. Add to the fact that Godzilla isn't necessarily out to fight humanity, but dragged into a fight started by humans. Here, Godzilla almost died, but then resuscitated by Rodan's sacrifice. But what about the other instances? Recapping what was seen in Godzilla vs. Destroya, here Godzilla wasn't portrayed as the type of anti-human destroyer we saw in the 50s, but similar to the anti-hero Godzilla we know and love, Legendary Godzilla. The similarities in character are almost identical. But note how here Godzilla doesn't get killed by humans. Or at least they didn't try to. In fact, here they were depicted monitoring and trying to help him. This of course ended up being useless as we see Godzilla succumb to this meltdown. So, seeing as to how Godzilla died in the past, what does this tell us about how Godzilla could die in the future? Well, in the Monsterverse, he almost died again. Recall the incident in 2019 during Godzilla King of the Monsters, where Admiral Stenz told the Monarch crew to get the hell out of the coast of Ilha de Mara due to an incoming oxygen destroyer. Yes, this turned out to be one of the only weapons that were very effective against Godzilla, to the point of weakening his heart rate so much that he was seemingly dead. That, or his radioactive levels turned so weak that they turned undetectable to Monarch's bioacoustic sensors upon the G-Man's retreat. Godzilla was then charged up in an inverted sequence of events to that in 1954, where Dr. Ishiro Serizawa instead sacrificed his life to save Godzilla. Given that Godzilla almost died in King of the Monsters and suffered a meltdown in Godzilla vs. Destroya while being the anti-hero that he was portrayed as, we might see this happen again in the not-so-near future. One thing that the Monsterverse has established pretty well is that this Godzilla isn't necessarily evil. That being, he's not out to eliminate humanity out of spite, and when he does kill humans, it's because he's provoked. Or we just so happen to be collateral damage. Instead, he is portrayed as a guardian of the natural order, eliminating threats to the planet, or just making sure that the threats are kept in check. And when they aren't, well, y'all know what happens. Since this Godzilla and humans aren't at a crossroads just yet, it's likely that the death of Godzilla is going to happen in a battle with another Titan threat. And since we've seen the cases in King of the Monsters and Godzilla vs. Destroya where Godzilla goes through a meltdown, who knows if this is what's going to happen again? And how, you may ask? Enter GXK Supernova. This word alone carries many implications, but most definitely involves phenomena and elements from outer space. Another pattern seen so far is seeing Godzilla absorbing different sorts of energy to take on different and increasingly powerful forms. We have seen Godzilla absorb radioactive energy 3 times, one which almost killed him. We have also seen Godzilla absorb DNA from other kaiju twice already. So, will this happen again? For those who need a recap, a supernova is a powerful explosion that happens when a massive star reaches the end of its life. Throughout its lifetime, a star burns fuel in its core to stay stable and shine. But when it runs out of fuel, it can no longer support itself, and gravity causes it to collapse inward very quickly. This sudden collapse triggers a massive explosion called a supernova, which can become so bright that it outshines an entire galaxy for a short time. After the explosion, what remains could be a dense neutron star or even a black hole. The blast also sends stardust and important elements into space, which can later help form new stars, planets, and possibly new life. Alright, so lots to digest here, especially since we just discussed the most spectacular form of death in the universe, which coincidentally is also present in the title card for the new movie. Now, we aren't here to say that Godzilla will definitely die in the next movie. After all, this could be something that happens to the opposing kaiju that fights Godzilla, whoever that might be. But let's pretend for a moment that this does happen to Godzilla. Some folks at Goji HQ developed a fun little theory that shouldn't be taken at all seriously. So sit back, relax, and hear us out. There were a few hints given by the cast members of what might happen in the next movie. As mentioned in the previous video discussing this title reveal trailer, one of the cast members, Alicia Debnam Carey, posted this: 2 fairies, a shooting star, phone, and dinosaur. Now, shooting stars are technically meteors, which normally burn up before hitting the Earth's crust, but sometimes they don't. Just ask these guys. But less rarely, some end up hitting the Earth, providing Earth's inhabitants with unique metal alloys that are pretty rare by our standards. And in this world of science fiction, anything is fair game when it comes to elements coming from outer space. The theory goes that if Earth does indeed get hit by a shooting star, this alien material could contain a new radioactive element that is not found on Earth. And you may already guess where this is going. Legendary Godzilla, who is exceptionally sensitive to these sort of phenomena, would likely race to be the first to inspect and possibly even absorb this new energy, bringing forth a brand new form to Godzilla, but also one that the G-Man's earthly biology isn't quite used to, possibly bringing up some issues in its internal anatomy that will compromise him, and potentially seeing another King of the Monsters scenario where he's about to blow. This aligns well with the Zos La Halawa segment many people reference from the GVK novelization. The Godzilla who ate a star may be reinterpreted in this new film as a prophecy and an event that happened in the past, explaining why we see many Kongs, hence Kong's newly acquired army, and a red supercharged Godzilla fighting a new threat. That said, we shouldn't discard the idea that if Godzilla did indeed consume said stars in the past, that being foreign energy sources, it won't be surprising if he does this yet again. This is without mentioning that someone else could have gotten to this meteorite site first and absorbed the energy. That, or some sort of organism managed to crack out of said craft and Godzilla siphoned up any leftover energy. The word supernova comes to scare us again, with the implication that Godzilla would likely die in battle similar to what almost happened last time in King of the Monsters. This time taking the highly marketable supernova form and sacrificing his life for the conservation of Earth. We understand how this may stir up some mixed feelings with many of you. We also do agree that it is too early to completely kill off Godzilla this early in the Monsterverse, especially with other titans like Destroya waiting patiently to make their debut in this cinematic universe. But there may be a flip side to this. Assuming that Godzilla does indeed die in battle and seemingly sacrifice himself for the conservation of Earth, both an honorable way to go and one which many of our fans agree with, who's to say that Godzilla won't return in the next trilogy? This is a concept that has been seen in the past as well, with the 1984 film incident implying that Godzilla died but ends up returning in the next film. A perfect way to set up the next trilogy of the Monsterverse. So, bottom line is, don't be surprised if Godzilla seemingly makes a heroic exit in this next outing. We may just see him come back more powerful than before, especially with progressively more powerful foes.